Hi, I'm Will Sharon. I want to talk to you today about the three levels of listening to a dream in the coaching paradigm. Um, and these three levels are very similar to the kind of listening we all learned when we got our coaching certificates, but they add a little bit of a different dimension to it. So, the first level in listening to a dream is the story. Well, that's interesting because as coaches, we interrupt stories all the time. But the reason this story is important to listen to is because it's never been told before and it's never going to be told again in this particular way. And it has usually rearranges the client's biography in some way or another, adds people at different ages, the client may be at a different age, etc. So what we want to do is we really want to get a sense of the story of the dream. And that's why I always suggest to people that before they start telling me a dream, they identify anybody in the dream that they know. So we get the cast of characters and we don't have to sort of pull ourselves out of the dream to say, oh, that's Uncle Frank and this is who he was to me, etc. So we get the people and we get the places for the same reason. Because what we want is the experience literally of sitting in the theater and watching the play sitting next to our client. So we get the story. And we also want to know or notice, is the client in the story or is the client observing the story? When someone is in the story of their dream, and I always hesitate to make, ironclad statements here, but usually what that means is it's like that place, the map of the mall where there's an X and says you are here. That's usually what the dream is saying if you are in the action of a dream. If you're observing a dream, it tends to be more archetypical. That is to say, it tends to be more about values. It tends to be more about perhaps a situation you're considering or you've left, etc. Okay, so whether you're in the dream or not is useful to know. And once we get the story down and we can understand the beginning, the middle, and the end, and those dreams usually come in those kinds of three parts. Not all of them, but the majority of them come with a beginning, middle, and an end. And they're all important parts of the dream. Obviously, where you end up is sort of the message of the dream, but how you get there is also very important. So that's the story part of the dream. The next thing we want to do is we want to understand the emotional arc of the dream. And to do that, I will very often go back to the beginning of the dream once I've heard the story and say, okay, in this part of the dream, what was the feeling? What was the emotion? And we'll go back through the dream and discover that emotional arc. And I find it very useful to come up with a one-word descriptor for each part of the dream. So I'm going to give you an example. This is a dream that a woman had who came to one of my workshops. And basically, I've used it before, but it's a story about her driving in a van with her two children in the back on a country road. She comes up to a traffic jam. Nothing's moving. And she's waiting, nothing's moving. And so she asks her older son to get out and take a look, which he does, and he doesn't come back. And then eventually she gets out of the car, walks around the back, and she sees a body in the street. She thinks it's her son. She looks closer and she realizes it's not him. But there are other bodies underneath it, and he might be one of those bodies. She's so frightened she wakes up. Okay. Well, that's a nightmare, obviously, and nightmares are always very useful in these kinds of conversations because they're very clear. So we went back and looked at the emotional arc. We had the story. We went back and looked at the emotional arc. Well, what was it? Well, the first part of it was frustration. She's in a traffic jam. Nothing's moving. The second part of it is action. She does something. She actually does two things. One is she sends her son out, and then she gets out, right? And the third emotion is disaster, or probably the most horrific event you could think of if you were a parent. Okay, so we have frustration, action, disaster, and we have the story of the dream. Now, once we have those two elements, the third thing that we're really listening for is the message of the dream. What does this dream mean in the daily life right now of the client? So the emotional arc usually is the thing that is very instructive. Because when I said to her, okay, frustration, action, disaster, what does that remind you of? She said, my life. Because she felt stuck, but she also felt like if she did anything, it would be a disaster. And potentially it would be a disaster in her family, that somehow things would come apart. And this woman is actually quite an accomplished coach who wants to do more, right? Okay, so those are the three parts of listening to the dream: the story, the emotional arc, the message. And these are really, this really exemplifies why we work with dreams as coaches, because they give us very clear agendas. This is what one might call a table setter dream. This is the issue. This is the agenda for this particular client. Exactly this situation. So those are the three ways to listen to a dream. That you can listen to your own dreams in that way. And I would really recommend to you that you look at the emotional arc from the standpoint of single words. It's much more powerful. And the message as a single sentence, much more powerful, as are dreams in general in the work that we do. So I hope that was useful.